Hello and welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Whether you're a regular viewer or a first timer, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to log in. And I hope that you enjoyed the content we've prepared for you. What you might not realise as you sit there adjusting your headset or reaching for another biscuit is that these webinars reach a truly global audience with forensic professionals from across the world joining us every week. So whether you're watching from a bedsit in Bromsgrove or a crime lab in Caracas, I hope that you'll agree to be part of an international community of professionals with a shared common goal of improving the quality of forensic evidence is truly amazing. So back to business. When planning webinars, we're always looking for a common theme that is informative and educational for our global audience. Obviously, we like to promote our products, but our aim is always to do a bit more than that. And this week, we're going to look at forensic light sources, Crime-lites, a forensic tool that could be considered universal. Crime scene investigator teams and lab examiners worldwide use high-intensity illumination to detect and examine evidence, including body fluids, finger marks, and other traces. And over the years, on our many travels, we found that while everyone is using these lights, no two examiners are using them in the same way. There is actually a huge variation in the way that lights are used and in the knowledge levels of their users. So this week, we're going to run through some essential light source examination techniques and take a look at the theory behind forensic light source examination. So throughout the webinar, we'll also be looking at the validation process for forensic light sources and how it's really important that CSIs and labs create a robust quality assurance process that ensures that light sources are always being used to their full potential. Why use a forensic light source? To reveal the greatest amount of evidence, it is important to carry out examinations across the forensic spectrum, and this includes the use of ultraviolet, visible and infrared light sources. A forensic light source will increase the amount of evidence that is detected and can simultaneously increase the efficiency of both crime scene and laboratory examinations. Light is part of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is a collection of waves. Some parts of the electromagnetic spectrum are what is termed as visible light, whilst other regions of the spectrum, such as UV and infrared light, are what we term to be non-visible light. The Crime-lite range can be utilised to search and detect evidence across this spectrum range. We can also use a range of different applications with Crime-lites to increase the amount of evidence that can be recovered. This can include fluorescence, material absorbs one wavelength and emits another, absorption, material retains particular wavelengths, and reflection, gives back, not absorbed, just touches the surface. Fluorescence. Different evidence types will absorb different wavelengths of light emitted from your Crime-lite and produce fluorescence which can be viewed. We then can use goggles or filters to block out the emitted light which is not being absorbed in order to view the fluorescent emissions. Long-pass filter goggles or camera lens filters must be used to view the fluorescent emissions. Long-pass filters simply block the illumination waveband, allowing the fluorescence to pass. Bandpass filters allow the examiner to block all but a narrow waveband of light above and below the fluorescence emission. An easy way to understand the theory of fluorescence is actually to think about driving a car. We don't put our headlights on during the day because we can't see the light being emitted from them, i.e. the fluorescence. This is due to the overwhelming daylight all around us, stopping it from being visible light emitted from the Crime-lite. If we block out that emitted daylight, the emission from the Crime-lite with a filter, such as when we drive at night, we can then easily see the headlight beam, view the fluorescence. Light sources can also be used for both contrast and oblique light examinations. For contrast imaging, we can use light sources of different colours to lighten or darken either the background or the evidence we are focused upon. Similar colours reflect, lightening colour, whilst opposing colours will absorb and therefore darken. This will create contrast between the evidence against its background and improves our visualisation of the evidence. A colour wheel can be useful to help determine which light source is best to use. For example, if you have an anhydrine finger mark on a green background, such as American currency, we could potentially use a green light source on this evidence to create contrast. A green light would lighten the green background and darken the opposing colour. As an anhydrine is a magenta colour, it would therefore also darken the finger mark. Your end result would therefore result in a dark finger mark against the lighter background. So when using contrast imaging, the image will give the best contrast when viewed in grayscale. We can also use low-angle oblique light examinations to cast shadows and reveal evidence such as 3D finger marks, footwear marks, and tool marks or surface impressions. UV fluorescence is widely used for the examination of evidence. UV light is not visible to the naked eye, but the UV fluorescence is emitted in the visible part of the spectrum. Therefore, we can often view this type of fluorescence without the need to wear any filtered goggles. We can also use UV in secondary applications to allow us to improve our visualization of different evidence types. If you have a UV sensitive camera fitted with a UV pass filter, it is possible to see the UV radiation that is reflected back by the evidence or background. The different quantities of UV that are reflected and or absorbed creates and improves contrast between surfaces and the evidence types upon them that cannot be seen by the naked eye. At the opposite end of the spectrum, we can perform infrared examinations for a range of different forensic applications. IR light consists of longer wavelengths that cannot be seen by the naked eye, but which are reflected and absorbed in different quantities by different substrates. Since we are again working in the non-visible part of the spectrum, an IR-sensitive camera is needed to view evidence within the IR region. The camera essentially becomes an extension of our eyes, allowing us to capture a wide range of evidence which may previously have gone undetected. In summary, there is always more evidence at the crime scene than can be visualized with the naked eye. Different illumination wavelengths are used to locate and examine a range of different types of forensic evidence. Examination of evidence beyond the visible spectrum may reveal more than fluorescence examination alone. And crime lights can increase the amount of evidence that is detected by supporting multispectral illumination across the entire spectrum. Here at FosterFreeman, our Crime-lite range consists of handheld light sources, lab-based light sources, and now the Crime-lite Auto, fully integrated forensic camera and illumination system. As well as the crime lights themselves, we also offer a fairly comprehensive range of accessories that include fluorescence viewing goggles, camera filters, crime scene accessories such as tripods and carry cases, and also testing and validation tools such as the Crime-lite Eye Dark Adaptation Checker, and most recently of all, this new interactive sample kit. Today we're going to take a closer look at this sample kit. We're going to use it to demonstrate some basic examination techniques identifying the best illumination wavelengths for each evidence type and the value of searching outside the usual range of wavebands. We'll also take a look at how the kit has been put together and why it could prove to be an invaluable training tool and play a vital part in your validation and accreditation process. Having released a number of new Crime-lites over the past 12 months, we're all too aware of the fact that many labs will need to validate the use of these new products in order to meet ISO quality standards. With this in mind, we made it our aim to make this process as easy as possible for labs and at the same time create a new training tool that ensures that end users are capable of using their new Crime-lite to its maximum potential. What we came up with was the concept of interactive sample kits. Let's take a look at the sample kits in a bit more detail. This is the kit for the Crime-lite Auto. When I open up the box, the first thing that you'll see is the video starts with our very own Laura Dodd, a familiar face from previous webinars, provides a comprehensive overview of the product and runs through some of the important product features and functions. In the box itself, you'll find a product user guide, a charger cable, and a USB memory stick. This is where we've stored validation images that are unique to this individual box. I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. When we remove the top layer, the first layer of samples are revealed. Now in this Crime-lite Auto kit, we have 20 individual samples representing a wide variety of evidence types, including body fluids, common finger mark treatments, fibres and accelerants, etc. It's important to note that not all of these samples are the genuine article, due to restrictions that limit the types of materials that we can safely ship around the world. Some of the samples are in fact simulated. For example, this sample is simulated body fluids. It doesn't contain any actual human body fluids, but it does have a near identical fluorescence emission that allows us to practice getting results in a way that will detect traces of genuine body fluids when used on real-life evidence. Each of these samples has been selected not only to reflect what you might likely see during an investigation, but also to enable the user to practice a broad variety of examination techniques. I should add that a lot of research we've done on the subject has been built on the back of robust scientific findings, evidenced in numerous independent published papers. With one of our favourite products at FosterFreeman, the Crime-lite Auto. Its ease of use, automatic selection of filters and capture of images, all in the one device. A sample of blood on a difficult dark and pattern background for examiners due to the lack of contrast. If we look at this sample with white light in live mode, the camera is in real time, tapping the screen, provides the focus indicator window, and this turns green to indicate our image is in focus. And then with the button to the right of the screen, it allows us to capture an image. Using a technique known as reflected infrared, we can now visualize the blood as it is absorbed, and the background reflects the infrared and looks white, and the blood absorbs and looks dark. We can also use the inverse to get a nice dark sample. The difficulties of searching dark casework items for blood are well documented. Typical searching methods can be time-consuming and may result in potentially important blood stains being missed. Using reflected infrared, we can clearly see the blood, which enables the examiner to interpret the pattern and also select the most appropriate areas for presumptive testing and DNA analysis. Our next sample is of gunshot residues, as detailed in the paper by James Bailey et al., a non-destructive test for gunshot residues on dark and multicoloured fabrics. When a firearm is discharged, a plume of gunshot residues exits the barrel and creates a visible powder pattern, providing a specific muzzle to target distance. See our example here of a dark fabric, first in white light and then in infrared, of our simulated gunshot residue. This next sample is a favourite, and again based on independent research in 2018, detection of painted over traces of blood and seminal fluid. Painted over bloodstains are most easily visualised by infrared photography. Here we have used a paint that absorbs infrared and can easily be visualised under a paint that does not absorb infrared, which enables us to see through the layers of paint on the surface. Another paper by Andrew Farrar concludes bloodstain evidence can be detected beneath up to 6 layers of paint. This technique provides CSI with a new field method to assist in locating, visualising and documenting painted over bloodstain evidence. And now to demonstrate our auto accessories. And to demonstrate our auto accessories, we have a finger mark in microsil, but it might be putty or clay or even blood to create a 3D impression. With the oblique lighting accessory attached to the front of the Crime-lite Auto, we can use white or UV light, choose the brightness of light with these options on the screen and the angle. So with the coaxial light box, useful for samples reflective in nature, the Crime-lite Auto automatically changes the coaxial light box software, which provides us with the ability to change the brightness of the light intensity, the angle of coaxial light, and also manually focus with small and large increments using this slider bar. If you're unsure which light source to use, turn the sample to see the most appropriate light source and filter selection. Now let's have a go using something a bit more like a traditional handheld light source. The Crime-lite X isn't quite your traditional light source, it's more like a full collection of 10 light sources contained within a single handheld Crime-lite. So from this device we can produce 10 wavebands of illumination from UV through to infrared. Also included in the X10 kit is a set of Pro Vision goggles with a magnetic goggle frame and filters. The filters include a dichroic anti-glare coating that prevents autofluorescence from the filter glass itself from interfering or quenching the fluorescence from the evidence. These goggles are another of our product developments and a great example how we're exploring every possible avenue to try and improve examiners' comfort while searching and locating evidence using our crime lights. The first sample here is of accelerants. If we start with the white crime light using our Crime-lite X and then turn the blue light source on and select this snap-on viewing filter to our Pro Vision goggles, we can now see evidence of an ignitable liquid on this coloured patterned fabric, not visible under the white light. The second sample I'd like to show you using the Crime-lite X10 is the fibres, not easily visible in white light but clearly fluorescing under the blue light with a snap-on viewing filter, long pass filter, OG550. Fibres fluoresce under many different wavelengths. Visualising fibres at a scene or on a body can provide valuable information of contact between suspect and crime scene, suspect and vehicle, and suspect and weapon if wearing gloves, or even victim and weapon or victim and vehicle. We also manufacture an X5 version that contains, as you might have guessed, 5 wavelengths of light, but you get 2 LEDs per wavelength. You may also hear this being referred to as the Crime-lite X serology, because it includes UV, violet, blue, blue-green and white LEDs, the most useful illumination bands when searching for body fluids. So this sample is simulated body fluid and could be semen, saliva, sweat or urine. If we use the white light first and then the blue-green light with the appropriate snap-on viewing filter, we can see evidence of body fluid fluorescing on this light-coloured fabric, not visible to the naked eye or under the white light. If we change to a different sample on a difficult background, where the background is interfering with the body fluid, we can choose the bandpass filter as described in the light theory section of this webinar. This blocks out the fluorescence emitted by the fabric to visualise only that fluorescence emitted by the sample. There are loads of published papers detailing the use of light sources, clearly stating the light source is a simple, non-invasive, non-destructive method used to detect biological fluids, wounds, contusions and bite marks, human remains and a range of other evidence types. Of course, our affectionately called serology Crime-lite can also be used to visualise treated finger marks, drugs, debris, fibres and hairs, as well as body fluids. So, as you can see, these samples are a fantastic training resource, providing an ideal set of practice samples for a variety of evidence searchers. But looking beyond simply practicing with your light source, the kits have also been designed with validation in mind. Introducing a new technology, something like the Crime-lite Auto or perhaps our ML Pro system, into your crime scene or laboratory workflow will often require validation and quality assurance to prove beyond doubt that the equipment or technique is fit for purpose. It's something of a necessary evil that, while often being time-consuming and laborious, is essential to proving the quality of your work and maintaining the integrity of your evidence. It is our intention that these interactive sample kits will provide you with a really useful tool that will assist you through the process of validation. Every sample with the kit being manufactured and assembled under laboratory conditions, and as well as that, includes a collection of validation images that are included as part of the kit. But instead of me trying to explain any further, I'm going to pass over to Lewis Hobbs, our pilot production engineer, who will take us through the sample validation process in a bit more detail.
Pilot production lead at FosterFreeman involves taking a product from R&D and producing it in numbers required by cell. We're using a brand new bespoke facility, freshly painted and kitted out for our new sample kit production. Some of the processes introduced from prototype build to the production build were the cutting of materials used within the kits. We used an external source to cut the laser materials to fit the plastic capsules. We introduced tooling and jigs to accommodate for bulk production. We also introduced SOPs to ensure consistency across the range of kits, and lean manufacturing to reduce waste. So we validate the kits by taking a number of images using various wavelengths and filters, and the validation images are then loaded onto a USB stick for customer referencing.
Thanks for that, Lewis. It might seem like we're going to a lot of trouble over these kits, and in all honesty, that's because we are. We understand how important validation and accreditation is to our customers, and we're doing everything we can to assist in that process. We're working closely with regulatory bodies to ensure that our products continue to exceed expected standards, and we're providing end users with diagnostic, calibration and validation tools wherever possible. Now, before we end, I do want to say a bit on creating your own validation samples. As I mentioned previously, these interactive sample kits are a wonderful training resource and cover a fairly comprehensive selection of evidence types. But if you want to add further samples to the kit, we would recommend creating your own body fluid samples. The process can be very simple, and we're more than willing to provide guidance on how to get started. It's a subject that I'm personally very invested in, and something that I really do think laboratories should be doing. If you have any questions about creating validation samples, or if you want to know a bit more about our interactive sample kits or any of the other products that you've seen today, then stay online and we'll be taking your questions over the next 20 So many of you, especially for a repeat webinar. So I hope those that have joined us for a second time notice the improvements. We've certainly got a much better recording this time, and we're happy to say that the volume and the sound and the video went together nicely. I'm joined today by our sales manager, Richard Evans.
Good morning, everyone.
You'll recognise Richard. He's a regular with our webinar series. And we've got a lovely number of questions, all very easy for us to answer, I would say.
Yeah, so far.
So we'll kick off with some questions we received ahead of the webinar. And one question that was asked was, which is the best light source to use for body fluids, blood, saliva and semen? So for saliva and semen, I would suggest using the blue or the blue-green light source, but this shouldn't preclude other light sources because it does depend on the substrate. And this is what we're trying to encourage users to use a greater variety of wavelengths. And with the Crime-lite Auto, of course, you get automatic filter selection, intelligent filter selection, and this makes it so much easier. And you can also take a photo of the image.
And just to clarify that, Ivan, I mean, when you say substrate, we're talking about the background colour, aren't we? And also, yes, in some instances, even the material itself can have an effect as well on the light source.
The weave, the finish, the washing conditions, and that's on fabrics. But then, of course, you've got so many more different substrates. We've done quite a lot of research with fabric swatches, and more recently, we're looking at items of clothing. And you're absolutely right. There's a very large number of parameters to be considered. And for the blood, I would recommend infrared. The blood absorbs really nicely, and the background drops out on dark fabrics. And this is particularly useful for blood pattern analysis. You can clearly see the pattern, and I think that's important that you do see the pattern, and that you can then select appropriately the area for DNA. You don't need to take the whole sample, you take a part of it.
And from the same person as well, we have a sort of follow-on with that, which is also about what's the best combination of light to detect fingerprints. Now, generally, this is probably one of the most asked questions we have in the whole of the webinars, and when people ask this, we assume that you mean latent fingerprints, because obviously if you're using chemical techniques, then the best light source will depend on the chemical technique that you're using. But if we're talking about latent or untreated fingerprints, well, the best light source to use, it's again quite difficult to answer because it depends on so many things. One of the main reasons that we find untreated fingerprints is generally because of contamination in the fingerprint, not the actual basic fingerprint itself, which in general, most of the components of the fingerprint, the sweat and the salts, they don't actually fluoresce. So if we're going to try and find untreated fingerprints, we are going to have to be reliant on either the fingerprint creating a difference between the fingerprint and the background, or some contamination in the fingerprint that fluoresces. Now, when you think about it, our hands come into contact with loads of different chemicals every day: soap, food substances, it might be hair gel, shaving gel, oranges, yeah, chocolate, coffee, things like this. And many of those components do actually fluoresce. So quite often when we're looking for latent fingerprints, untreated fingerprints, we're trying to make an unknown substance fluoresce. So the way in which we go about that is generally by trying to use as many different wavelengths as possible. That said, based on our experience, probably if we had to pick one, we'd probably go with the green, which is one of the reasons why we've launched the Crime-lite LASER green, which is probably one of the most best tools to use for untreated fingerprints. But it's impossible to give an answer as to which is the best, because the best one is whichever works the best with whatever the contamination is. So it's a very woolly answer, but it's the right answer in effect.
A lot of forensic scientists do say it depends when they're stood with a spot.
Yeah, and just on that as well, there's a question about the filters. Which filters? Well, when you actually use the Crime-lite Auto, it automatically selects the filter. That's where the name comes from. So when you select, for example, the blue light or the blue-green or the green light in the Crime-lite Auto, the Auto will automatically select the filter, so you don't have to think about it. Now, the Auto is also quite clever in that although it will select the best filter, that doesn't stop you from putting it into manual mode and overriding the filters, because in some instances, quite rare instances, but you can actually get better results by going to a higher filter in some instances.
The bandpass filters.
Yeah, or a bandpass filter. That's a very good point, because most filters are actually long pass filters, but the Auto actually contains 2 different bandpass filters, which are specific for body fluid examinations, which can be really useful in some cases as well.
Lovely. Now, the other question you were going to answer, Richard, was the preferred illumination system. Is it LED or metal halide?
Yeah.
I think it means halide.
Yeah, metal halide, yeah. So over time, I mean, forensic light sources have been around now for in excess of 40 years. Certainly Foster&Freeman, we've been making them for almost 30 years. And so technology's evolved over that time. So in the original light sources, there were metal halide or xenon lamps. Then in the early about 2002, we were the first company to introduce LED technology. And then more recently, obviously, we've seen we've seen lasers that have become portable. The best light source to use is going to be the ones that give you the most power over a narrow wavelength, and that is actually a laser. So the laser will generally be the best light source to use, then LED, and then the earlier ones. The problem with the earlier ones, the sort of xenon and the metal halide ones, is that when you actually use a filter with them, you still have a very wide wavelength of illumination, typically 50 nanometers, maybe something like that. And that's not necessarily beneficial, because you don't want to excite everything. We're only trying to excite what we're finding, which in a lot of cases is the body fluid, for example. And the wider the excitation range, the more chance you have of actually exciting the background. And that's exactly what we don't want to do. We only want to excite the body fluid, but leave the background unexcited. So that's why a narrow beam wavelength is preferable, and the LEDs give you a narrow wave band than a xenon light or a metal halide, and then moving further on, the laser will give you an even narrower wavelength of excitation compared to the LEDs. So in order of preference, it would be laser, probably LED, and then like the old-fashioned xenon or metal halide lamps. But of course, that doesn't take into account the costs either. So typically the costs for the laser will be more than the LED, and the cost of the LED is going to be more than the xenon or halide type lamps. But the problem is, if you want the best light sources with the most power and it'll give you the best results, they do cost more money. It's as simple as that. And you know, we do see a lot of light sources on the market that the performance is really, really poor, and people are just not going to find much evidence. You know, you need the power. You need the correct wavelengths over a narrow band of illumination. And then the other thing that's massively that gets forgotten about is the actual filters. The filters are equally important as the light source itself. And we are pretty much the only manufacturer that makes custom filters. A lot of other manufacturers, they just use the plastic filters that come in the red, yellow, and orange flavors. Well, they're generic filters. They are not optimized for the different colors of light. And if you want the best performance, you do need a different filter for every single wavelength, in
and
fact.
the non-reflective shot.
Yeah, yeah, and also the non-reflective, because as you move to the higher powered light sources, you actually get you can cause fluorescence in the glass or in the plastic, which reflects back onto the surface that you're examining, and then that will mask or hide the fluorescence of the body fluids. So we actually have the special coatings on our filters that actually stop that happening. So no matter how powerful the light source, you actually don't get any fluorescence from the filter back onto the area of examination. Yeah.
I would say another important aspect is the portability of those light sources, and that might be a major consideration for someone going to a scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we go back 40 years, the light sources used to weigh about 80 kilogram. And yet today now we're using handheld items that are less than a kilogram, and people often moan about the weight of that. But yeah, I mean, there's been such advances in technology over the last 40 years that if you were to show a crime scene examiner what we use today from 40 years ago, they just wouldn't believe it. You know, it wouldn't have been possible.
Now, another question we received was, how do you calibrate the light sources? And we calibrate using a Crime-lite tester. So you can send in your light sources to be calibrated at our headquarters here in Evesham, and you will receive a certificate to say that the light source has been calibrated, or you can purchase for yourself if you have a large number of products and you need to calibrate them on a regular basis for your laboratory or for your crime scene work, and you can purchase a Crime-lite tester. So you just need to get in touch and ask for a quote for that item.
Yeah, and if I can just add a bit to that as well, Yvonne. Obviously, when we sell the Crime-lites, every Crime-lite that we sell will come with like a certificate of calibration at the factory. So we do measure the wavelength output and the intensity, and you get a certificate of that. Then, obviously, over time, many of the ISO 17025 regulations will sort of insist that we have to retest that light source to make sure it is operating as expected. So as Yvonne says, yeah, you could send them here, but also some of our distributors around the world offer this facility as well. So it may well be that there are distributors for your country that can offer local recalibration services or retesting services for your light sources. Yeah. And again, I think we are the only manufacturer that actually does this. And it's not free. We do charge for it because it takes time, and we have to produce the certificates, but it is quite a nominal charge, and then you can have the light source recalibrated. And I guess one of the other questions that we get asked a lot was, well, how often should we do this? And that is really down to your own standard operating procedures. You know, it may be some customers would have this done every 6 months, probably the majority every year. Yes, some customers maybe every 2 years, and it's not really for us to say, unfortunately.
Might be how often you're using them as well.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, the more you use it. I mean, with the modern LED lights and lasers, they should not move or change at all over a very short period of time. You know, I think even over 30 years of use, the LEDs would probably we would expect the intensity to vary just by a few percent. No. It's a really, really small amount. Whereas if you compare that to the old xenon or metal halide light lamps, after 10 hours use, they can have their intensity drop by 10%. And over a slightly longer period, they can drop up to 30%. So it's also dependent on the type of light source that you're using. And the older lamp type light sources will actually have their intensity drop much more rapidly compared to an LED or a laser type product.
Now, you also had a question from India.
Yes.
That you wanted to answer, because you mentioned then
that's right.
That distributors have Crime-lite testers.
Yeah, we had a question about, do you ship to India? Yes, we ship to about 140 different countries around the world, and in most countries we do have a local distributor, including in India, who will be able to provide quotations for you in local currency and including the importation duties and things like that. So the best thing to do is to send us a message at sales@FosterFreeman.com, and then we will put you in contact with the local distributor in your country.
There's a nice question here. Can the Crime-lite Auto be used in sunlight? It certainly can. It has a light sensor on the front of the Crime-lite Auto that will adjust the screen brightness accordingly so that you can see it easily. But we often find that when we're looking in infrared, you can actually see blood stains more easily when in sunlight. The fluorescence tends not to be as bright, and we often use a dark room for the best visualization of the fluorescence. But if you've got a stain and you've got bright fluorescence, you will still see it.
Yeah, I'll take this one. There's sort of two questions that are mixed together, and the first one is when we use the Crime-lite Auto, which goggles do we use? And also, if we use the Crime-lite Auto, does the light not affect the eyes, or is there goggles? Okay, so generally with the Crime-lite Auto, you don't have to use goggles. Because the goggles are your filter, but with the Crime-lite Auto, you're looking at the screen and the camera has the filter automatically applied to it. So you don't have to use goggles. The only goggles we supply with the Crime-lite Auto are actually UV goggles, which are UV protection goggles. So then they don't help you to see any fluorescence or anything, because you'll see that on the back of the screen anyway, but they are there just for protection. If, for example, you were looking at a reflective surface and the UV light was bouncing back at you, then we would recommend to use the UV goggles. But for general visible light colors, then there is no requirement to use a filter goggle at all.
And the arms on the Crime-lite Auto are interlocking so that you can't shine the lights from the arms. That's the white light, the UV and the infrared are on the arms of the Crime-lite Auto, the wings, if you like.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, because of the nature of the Crime-lite Auto, you're looking at the screen, the light's always going away from you. So unless you flip it over and point it into your eyes, and even then you get what's called a blink response, so your eyes will naturally just close down, and you're not going to do any damage unless you hold that light source there for a very, very long period of time. And those are some of the tests that we have to do, and we do have that data about the exposure limits for the different light sources, but based on those tests you don't have to wear the safety goggles at all, and we don't supply them apart from the UV protection goggles with the Crime-lite Auto. I'll take that middle one, Yvonne, which is how much for a kit. We don't give out prices in an open forum because we sell around the world and everybody has different import duties and taxes that are applied. So the price that we sell here is not relevant for your country. So what we always suggest to do is contact us at sales@FosterFreeman.com, and we'll put you in contact with your local distributor in your country, and they will give you a price, and again in local currency with all the import duties, taxes applied. So that's much more meaningful than us giving out prices here.
And for the UK, you get directly in touch with us and we'll send you a quote.
Yeah. I'll take a question. This is slightly off topic, but is there an advancing technology for the ESDA? So the ESDA is something that's used for document examination. So I'll just quickly answer this. Obviously, the ESDA has changed over the years. We've been selling the ESDA for ever since FosterFreeman existed, which is 42 years now. And the ESDA has changed from the ESDA 1 to the ESDA 2 to the ESDA 2A and now the ESDA 2B. So there has been an involvement in the technology. The principles are still the same, but the latest machine is the ESDA 2B, which has many sort of improvements. It's bigger than the original machine. It's cleaner than the original machine because there's filters built into it, and it's also more automated than the original machine. So yes, there are lots of improvements in the ESDA technology.
And while we're on other pieces of technology, we've been asked if it's helpful in identifying the sequence of strokes of writing and ridges of fingerprint. I think you need the VSC for that that capability. So the question came in about the sequence of strokes of writing, and this is really fascinating application, but the VSC has that technology and capability.
Mm-hmm. And the final question, I don't know whether Yvonne or me is going to answer this one because we're a little unsure, but the question is, which direction used when checking evidence? Now, I guess we're referring to what direction are we holding the light when maybe examining the evidence.
Do get in touch.
Yeah. If you could.
Clarification in the chat box, then do so. Get back to us.
Yeah. And yeah, if you can get back to us on that, we will give you an answer as soon as we understand what you're asking a little bit better. Yeah. Okay. I think we've exhausted our questions for today.
I did want to talk a little bit about the sample kit. So we have the sample kit here. Now, about half of these samples are simulated, and I wanted to make it clear as to why these are simulated. The kit contains a booklet we've already described within the webinar, but these are our 20 samples. Because of the Tissues Act, we're not able to freely send body fluids around the world, and we're aware that there could be an aspect of infectious diseases, certainly, although they're dried stains. It's the safety aspect. Also with the accelerant, it could be dangerous to send real accelerants, the same with perhaps gunshot residues, and of course we can't send drug samples. So we've got a simulated drug sample in the form of washing powder here, this sample here. And the samples are chosen so that they do look the same as the real deal, so the real body fluid, the blood would look the same under the Crime-lite.
They react the same, don't they?
Yes, exactly. And so they've been very carefully selected, but there are real samples in here too. So we've got a lovely fibres example, a nice fluorescent fibre. We've also got a paint sample so that you can see paint under paint using infrared. You can see through the paint almost, and this is a really lovely example. And we've got the recovered fingerprint on a brass plate, so that's a real sample. And we've got the example of very good oblique use of the oblique light source with the microsil fingerprint. So this is a nice example to use your equipment to also assist in training, really useful training aid. And also when we're doing online training, you have the same kit as we do. And it's very easy to say, take sample A or sample B, and we'll look at that, and this is what you should see. And the images of all the samples under the different light sources are provided with the kit. So you get a copy of that with your own personal kit to demonstrate what you should be able to see. But when we're delivering training, especially online, it's very helpful to use this kit. Do you want to say anything more? Have you done some training with this kit, Richard?
Yeah, I've done some training with that kit. I mean, the reason why we put this kit together is because no one else has ever done anything like this, and it's such an invaluable training tool. And I think when we do training here, and especially at the moment due to COVID, we're having to do training using videos exactly as we're doing here. One of the biggest problems is that when you're trying to explain how to use the light source is having the same sample both at the customer's side and our side. And the way these kits are designed, they will always give the same sort of results. And one of the things we do is for every single sample in the kit, we actually record photographically how the sample reacts. So we test the sample. So it's a verified sample. We know that that sample is working well. So when we send these samples out, if you've got the sample kit and we've got the sample kit, when we both pick the same sample, we will get the same result using the same wavelength of light and the same filter. So it's trying to do the training without that is actually really, really difficult because you can't be sure that you're both looking at the same thing. And it's also all about understanding the basics of light technology, trying to get into your mind about why different color fabrics affect things and why different body fluids react differently. I mean, Yvonne has done more research than probably anyone on looking at how different body fluids react. And people often put body fluids together. Well, they actually react slightly differently. You know, semen will react slightly differently to sweat and saliva and so on. You know, they're similar, but they're not the same. But more again, the substrate, the background is so important. And, you know, everybody always asks, every single question you get asked, what's the best light source for body fluids? And the answer is whichever gives you the best contrast between the background and the body fluid. And until you test it, you don't know. You know, it's unfortunate because everyone wants a simple answer. Oh, the best light source is blue, use that. Now we can generalize and we can make generalized for the different body fluids, but the best light source for your sample, only you can decide by using the different light sources and seeing which one gives you the most contrast.
This is a nice question on the back of that. Are there any recommendations for using the samples? For example, do you take the sample from the plastic box? Do you use disposable gloves? So you can take some of the samples, work really nicely by staying in the box. So you won't lose the fibers by keeping it within this box, but you'll still be able to see the fluorescent fibers. You can take it out of the box and the fibers are sealed within a plastic coating. So we've created a lovely contained fiber. So you can see that is a thin piece of plastic with the sample is written on the back. So you can see there's a label so that if it did come separate from the box, you'd be able to match it back. But it can be visualized very easily within that box. The samples, such as the brass plates, are actually better taken out to get a really good visualization of the fingerprint and using the coaxial box accessory of the Crime-lite Auto, you can place it down on the table and you can place the coaxial box on the top. So that's a sample that's better taken out. Again, labelled on the back, so you're not going to misplace it. And you can request more samples. If you do lose any of the samples out of the box, you can request a replacement. So you just need to do that.
Yeah, you don't have to buy the whole kit again, do you? And if I remember correctly, Yvonne, we've already mentioned on the back of each sample, you'll see there is a suggestion about the light source and the filters to use for every sample. And they're also numbered, aren't they, or have a letter? Yeah, they have a letter.
Yes.
So it's sample A, sample B. So again, when we're doing the training, we can say, right, please get sample F, and we'll get sample F, and then we can see how this works with the light source as well. What about the disposable gloves, Yvonne? That's a good point.
It's not like you're contaminating, or there's no danger of contaminating the body fluid with your DNA, because you're not looking for the DNA in using the sample kit. I know it's good practice to use gloves when you're at the crime scene or when you're in the laboratory, and it's all to do with the contamination of the item with your DNA, but we're locating the stain and we're demonstrating what the stain looks like using the Crime-lite Auto or using a light source. So it's not imperative that you wear gloves.
Yeah.
It's just good practice, as laboratory good practice to wear gloves. It's not essential.
Yeah.
I also want to mention that these samples have been put together based on the research that has been done independently and is out there, and we have got that literature available for you if you want to request the background to the sample kit. So there are a number of different papers that have been published by people around the world, and there's some very good research that has been done, and it backs up why we're choosing the sample that we're choosing. So the paint over paint sample is based on a paper that talks about semen underneath paint. So it's based on actual research and independent to what we've done. The absorption of blood in the infrared, there are a large number of papers talking about the use of infrared light sources for the examination of dark stained items. and being able to see the distribution. And the same with body fluids and the same with fingerprints. Should also mention we've got natural FP1 and FP2 on some patent papers. And we're very pleased to include samples of powders that we sell at FosterFreeman that have been developed here. So it also includes things that we want you to
experience, basically. Yeah.
Yes,
just to expand on that, I mean, the FP1, FP2 powders, for those of you that don't know, they're a special type of fingerprint powder that basically fluoresces in the infrared. So the fingerprint powder will be excited using either a red or near infrared light source. And then the fluorescence will happen in the infrared that you can't see with your eyes. So you can only use these really with an infrared sensitive camera to be able to see.
Could be used covertly as well, because
yeah.
they can't be seen.
Yeah, that's one of the great advantages. But the application for them is that when you actually look in the infrared with these type of powders, you only generally see the fluorescence of the powder, the fingerprint, and the background will actually generally disappear.
Yeah.
Now, not all backgrounds will disappear in the infrared, but certainly a substantial amount of them do. And one of the other applications for this is also banknotes. Now, most banknotes have a special security feature that when you examine them in the infrared, the ink drops out. And so what you end up with is almost like a white background, but then the fingerprint themselves will fluoresce if you're using the FP1 powders. So there's a couple of other things in the kit as well that are really interesting to have a look at, but you may need an infrared camera to actually look at them as well.
Right. Now, there's been a question about a certificate, and you can get a certificate of continuous professional development by automatically. They're generated and will be sent to all attendees of this webinar, so you can add that to your CPD points and the time that you're spending looking at the broader picture of forensic evidence. So that's useful for you.
Yeah. And so you don't have to request it. Just when we finish this, the certificate's generated and emailed out to you. So automatically.
The other thing I wanted to say was about the recording. The recording of the webinar today and the live Q&A will be available to you if you're not able to get to us at this time, because we are aware that there are a lot of people watching from overseas that are in different time zones, and it's very difficult for you to be either up early or up late. And so this recording is available, will be available later today.
Yeah. And in fact, if you go to the website, look for the webinars at the top, come down the page and you'll see on demand, and all the previous webinars are there for you to enjoy at any time of day. So that's a great resource. It's a great training resource for a lot of people. A lot of universities watch these webinars and use them for student education as well. So please make use of it.
And please give us your feedback. Tell us what you think. I'm very aware that this webinar featured the light theory, and I'm hoping you didn't find it too condescending, or the cartoons or the graphics were straightforward and explained clearly what we're trying to establish, what we're trying to demonstrate. So a better understanding of Crime-lite's, people are more likely to use them correctly, and when they use them correctly, they're going to use them more often, and they're going to be confident in court when they're explaining what they've done.
Yeah. And just to finalise, because we're out of time now, we are producing new content every 2 weeks. So today is a sort of a repeat of a previous one, but the Q&A is live. But again, next week, I think we have new content for you. And if there's something you'd like us to do, let us know. Let us know, and we'll see if we can do it. Because we've done I think we're up to about 40 something webinars now. So if we have missed something, and there's some subject matter within obviously what we sell that you'd like us to cover, then let us know, and we will try and do something if at all possible.
I'd just like to give a plug for our Crime-lite symposium. Crime-lite's in research. It's coming up in September, so look out for that.
Yeah, the symposiums are a sort of 6-hour event, 7-hour event
a
instead
day,
of a
yes.
30-minute one, yeah.
Yes.
And we've been getting absolutely amazing numbers. So we're doing one of those every few months. I think the idea is to do 3 or 4 a year, something like that. And the feedback has been incredible. We have guest speakers from all around the world, customers who are actually using our technology or are experts in their field. So again, it's a great learning research source. And
doing research as well?
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yes.
it covers the whole range, really.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
so thank you very much on behalf of us all at Foster&Freeman, from myself and Yvonne. Thanks for watching again today. Any questions, send them through to sales@fosterfreeman.com. But on behalf of us all, thank you very much and stay safe.